Welcome to It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Dr. Ann Bergen. Today we have a very special presentation from the Franklin Public Schools on its bullying prevention and intervention program. Bullying, as we know, is probably the most common form of violence across the country, and it has become a huge problem, particularly compounded in this age of social media. Recently, the Massachusetts legislature, recognizing the severity of this problem, has required all school districts in the state to come up with a very, very specific program to address this issue. And Franklin Public Schools has done just that, creating a very, very comprehensive plan, really fulfilling all of the requirements set out by this legislation. So here today in our studio are two representatives from the Franklin Public Schools who will be sharing that plan that has been created. We have with us Attorney Paige Tobin from the law firm of Murphy, Lamourie, and Murphy PC, and Peter Light, who is our assistant superintendent in Franklin. So I want to welcome both of you and thank you for coming. I know both of you have busy schedules, and this is such an important topic, though, so we're really grateful that you're here. And this legislation has been in effect for a few years, so again, we can talk a little bit about the progress and how we're doing with it and things like that. But how I'd like to kind of structure this, if you're okay with this, is ask if, Paige, if you would kind of give an overview of the legislation, you know, the big picture of this law and the process that's involved, how parents are involved, the police, that big picture focus. And then after that, if we could have a little bit of a discussion where we talk more specifically about what's happening in Franklin, how it's going. We can dig a little bit deeper into some of these topics and sort of answer those frequently asked questions that we know parents have, just because we've been dealing this for a while. Okay, does that make sense to you? All right. So, without further ado, as we say in the business, I'm going to turn it over to Paige and ask you to go ahead and give us your presentation.
Okay, great. So I think one of the important things to really think about when you're thinking about this law is that the intent of the legislature was really to make sure that everyone in the state was handling bullying in a very consistent manner. I think there was a view that certain school districts had different definitions of what bullying was and what bullying was not than other school districts, and that as a state, because of the increase in bullying perhaps across the state and throughout the country, that there needed to be a very consistent response. And that is what happened when the legislature really sort of defined bullying, what it is and what it isn't, and set out the roles of both the school and the family and law enforcement in addressing instances of bullying. So under the law, which is Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 71, Section 37O, bullying is defined very, very specifically as a repeated action by one or more students or members of the school staff. So it is very clear that one instance of unkind conduct or conduct that would violate a school rule would not be considered bullying under the state law. Now, certainly, if it is a very severe and pervasive instance that is one action and it involves a member of a protected class, that action could be viewed as a civil rights violation, or, for instance, gender harassment, sexual harassment, racial harassment. And that would be a violation of a civil rights law, but would not constitute bullying under a state law, which again requires repeated action. Our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has defined that as 3 or more times, although it's not defined in the statute. It also includes a written, verbal, or electronic expression or physical act or gesture, so it's very broad, and it is directed at a specific victim. The law prefers that we call the victim target of the conduct. So again, it's directed at a target and it causes one of the following things: physical or emotional harm, damage to property. It's conduct that places the target in reasonable fear of harm to him or herself or damage to her property. When they talk about reasonable fear, they use the standard of what a reasonable student would feel like in that situation. Would it be reasonable to fear something? And then that is how they investigate and determine whether the fear constitutes bullying. It is also something that can be a series of actions, repeated actions that have the tendency to create a hostile environment at school for the target, infringe upon the right of the target at school, or materially and substantially sort of disrupt the education process. You tend to see those hostile environment situations where, particularly with cyberbullying, where something is happening outside of school and it's something that's happening on social media, and again, it may be happening outside of school, but it's creating a hostile environment for a particular student at school, or it is causing such a disruption in the classroom, the grade, or in the school as a whole that it really is disrupting the educational process. The state has really determined that there are different types of bullying that we need to consider. It's not always something that's physical, but certainly any sort of physical conduct that is, again, repeated and directed at a target, name calling, teasing, sort of verbal or written conduct, or social, which is harder to investigate in many situations. It's sort of those underlying conduct where rumors are being spread about someone is excluded on purpose by a group of students. One student is trying to break up friendships involving other students and isolating sort of those less obvious but still very painful types of conduct that can happen in a school environment, and that also can constitute bullying. One of the more important things and things that we see happening quite frequently is, unfortunately, the use of cyberbullying, which has a very specific definition under the statute and really involves the use of technology or electronic communication, emails, social media, texting, and again, can occur through impersonation of a student, making a fake social, Instagram page about a student and putting something out there and having students respond to it, or just putting things out in social media, again, while the student is or is not at school, but that can really cause a hostile environment for the student at school. And that is something that has been very prevalent in our schools in Massachusetts that I've seen, and something that can be very difficult for school administrators to address. And it's also difficult sometimes for parents to understand the extent of the cyberbullying that's happening, because oftentimes students are not as willing to show school administrators and parents their social media pages and have them enter into that world. So it's hard for adults sometimes to really get a good handle on what's going on in terms of cyberbullying. Certainly the law, like any of laws that protect people from any form of harassment, the law includes a retaliation component, and that would be if someone is reporting bullying or helping by being a bystander that's assisting a student that's being bullied, or has information about it and comes forward, if other students or adults are responding by intimidating the person for being involved. Why did you do that and get my friend in trouble? That sort of payback or harassment that's directed against a student who reports bullying, that is viewed as retaliation. That's a very, very serious act and is something that certainly could not be tolerated in a school and really requires a specific prompt disciplinary response, and that also is included in the law. And really the reason for that is to protect students who participate in being responsible citizens in the school and responding to the conduct. So the law really has specific definitions about when we're talking about bullying. They don't like to use the term bully for the person who is engaging in that conduct. That person is called the aggressor. So you might hear a principal talk about a person again as an aggressor, and that would be the person who causes the harm. I spoke earlier that the target is the term that's used for someone who is the subject of the bullying. And bystanders are students, staff members, anyone who happens to be present, who who watch bullying occur, but sometimes do not say anything to help the target or stop the aggressor. And you'll see as Peter speaks, and if you explore this issue more, that there's a very large focus on empowering bystanders in a school setting to really help the target and stop the aggressor, because going back to the idea that a lot of the conduct is very below the surface. It's something that often students are aware of more so than adults. Adults can be present and not see what other students are seeing and perceiving. So the role of the bystander has been seen by research as being extremely important.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things that often comes up in addressing bullying situations in school is the difference between what's viewed as bullying and what's viewed as peer conflict. Because our state statute has a very specific definition of bullying, and then school policies, each school is required to have a written bullying policy and a written bullying plan about how to address bullying in a school district. But both of those have very specific components to them. Again, one being that the conduct is repeated. And sometimes there are situations where conduct is certainly a violation of a student code of conduct. It's unkind, it's not respectful. But it really is not involving repeated conduct or an imbalance of power that is frequently associated with bullying. And in that type of situation, it might be viewed as something that's a peer conflict. And again, it's something certainly that school districts address through very specific measures in terms of responding to students who are engaged in peer conflict to make it stop, and to remedy any cause of the peer conflict, any harm that would be caused. But it may be a situation where it's a peer conflict situation versus a situation that is really bullying as defined by our state statute and our school policy. An example of peer conflict is, again, students who are friends and get into a fight about something and disagree, and they each get their friends involved, and it becomes again a conflict. And that may be a conflict, but if they're both not perceived as one having an imbalance of power, it may be a situation that is a peer conflict versus just something that would be bullying. And oftentimes schools will use different methods to address peer conflict that are different than methods that are used to address bullying, because it's a different type of behavior that requires a different response. And again, I think sometimes I see in schools that a student or parent will report an instance of conduct that they view as bullying. The school will investigate it and determine that it wasn't, again, conduct that met the definition of bullying under the state law, but was still conflict that was unkind and not expected in a school system, and will address it as a peer conflict situation. And the parent doesn't understand why it's not termed bullying, but it is to know that we have to have this specific response, but it's going to be slightly different. So if it's bullying, the law, it really involves not only things that happen at school, but things on bus stops, at school functions or events, through any kind of school technology. If students have iPads or are on the library and the computer in the library, it would include all sites and activities in a school, and also non-school sites or activities if it creates a hostile environment at school. So that would, or materially and substantially disrupts the education process. So that would involve situations where perhaps on a weekend students are engaging in some sort of social media dispute, or targeting, a student is targeting another student on social media during the weekend, but that during the course of the week following, the target is feeling like she doesn't want to come to school because of what was said about her on the weekend in social media. Other students are talking about it, and again, it's really creating a hostile environment for her. In those situations, the school is required to address it. They're required to investigate, and they're required to respond to those situations. This is little bubble diagram that really talks about what parents should expect and what students should expect to happen once a report is made of bullying to principals or to whoever the school has determined will investigate bullying situations. So the very first thing that should happen is once the report is made, there should be a discussion with the target about how can we make you feel safe and supported during the course of the investigation, because it is the priority of every school district to make sure that students can attend school in a safe and supportive manner. So that should be the very first thing that happens. There should be some discussion about what can we do to make you feel safe while we investigate and respond to this instance. After that, the school is required by state law and its own policies to conduct an investigation. That investigation must include an interview of the target as well as the alleged aggressor. So sometimes families ask if it's necessary to speak to the target. The target may be shy, the target may be in first grade, and the parent wishes to just report the incident and have the school investigate without speaking to the target. But the law does require that the school, in an age-appropriate manner, in a way that makes the target feel safe and supported, speak to the target and get direct information from that student. Because while the student has shared the information with her parents, his or her parents possibly, it's not the same as getting direct information. So principals have been trained to speak to students in a way that is, again, supporting them and gathering the information that they need to conduct the rest of the investigation. So then the principal will investigate and speak with the aggressor, speak with other staff, witnesses, students, will collect any documents if there's a social media page and an Instagram page or a Facebook page. They will ask for copies of those things, and they will determine after that investigation what has happened. They'll determine whether the conduct is bullying, whether it is a conflict situation, whether it's potentially another situation, and they will make a finding. Once they do that, then they are responsible to, if they do find that there was bullying or if another school rule has been violated, they have to generally impose some sort of disciplinary action as necessary on the aggressor. They need to notify the guardian or the parent of the target and the aggressor about what the outcome of the investigation is. They need to, if it is something that was bullying, they would draft a safety plan for the target, and the safety plan really involves some input by the student and the parents and teachers and other folks in the district who really understand the student about what is going to make the student feel safe at school. So it shouldn't be something that's just provided by the school. It should have input from the student. Oftentimes the student is best able to talk about what will make her feel safe. And then that plan, there will be some check-ins and with the target to make sure that things are going well. And if it is possibly a criminal situation, law enforcement will be notified. Oftentimes school districts have specific agreements with the state, with police in the district, to notify them about situations, and that usually will include situations involving bullying. As I discussed, the police are very involved in collaborating with school districts to address bullying because, as we all know, it's not generally a problem that's limited to schools. It's something that then continues often and happens in the community and has to be addressed by a wide variety of people. If there are criminal implications of the bullying conduct, if it involves assault, threats, criminal harassment, stalking, disturbance of school assembly, the police may get involved and may, in fact, file charges against the aggressor. In certain serious cases, if a target has had 3 or more acts of willful and malicious conduct and is really being placed in fear by another person, there is a statute that was recently revised in 2010 that allows protective orders to be issued to really, again, serve as another method to protect a target, not only at school, but in the community from an aggressor who is engaging in significant harassment or bullying in various settings. One of the things that is very important for parents to know is to really understand what should be done if their child comes home and reports that they've been bullied at school. One of the things that we always talk about is making sure that the student is able to self-advocate for his or herself. It's really important for the student to feel like they have a trusted adult at school, someone that they feel comfortable talking to, a teacher, a guidance counselor, and a principal, a coach, someone that they feel if there's a problem at school they can go to and talk about it. So again, depending on the age of the student, the parent, may or may not want to call themselves, but one of the first things they should do is encourage their child to talk to the trusted adult at school. They always can follow up with a phone call to make sure that the conversation was reported accurately by the student and that they understand what the process is going to be. Every district does have on its website a link to the district's bullying plan and methods for which parents can also report. There are, in most districts, an ability to report bullying situations anonymously, although it is helpful to have the most information possible from families. So direct calls to the principal are very important as well, or an email or some sort of notice. And then parents can expect to receive information from the principal or the person who is investigating the bullying about what is going to happen. And what should be happening is the bullying plan should be followed. There's a very specific bullying plan that each school district has to have, and that bullying plan really should be followed in every case. So when families have concerns or questions about, is the process that is set out in the law going to be followed in my school, they should look at the website or speak to the principal and get a copy of the plan. And it really does set out a roadmap for how school districts should respond and how their children should be treated during the investigation and after the investigation. And again, the simple things that parents can do to help children is to really encourage kindness and respect at home, and really talk to children about being supportive and compassionate towards peers, and modeling really good and appropriate respectful behavior is a huge piece. Research has demonstrated that how children are, act in the community and see their parents and siblings act really impacts the way that they handle themselves at school. There are some resources that the state has that are on this PowerPoint that talk about where parents can go and look, and some are state resources, some are local resources to the Franklin Public Schools, but they're all very good resources. The Marks Center has several links that talk about what parents should expect and what students can expect, both from sort of a legal manner as well as a social response to bullying. And so I would encourage families to look at those as well.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. I wanted you to be able to present this without any interruption, because I think that this is going out to several communities, and it's sort of the generalized before we focus and home in on Franklin. But thank you for that, very thorough, and it covered every aspect of it. So I wanted to follow up with some of the things that surfaced here and bring Pete into this discussion as well. Because one of the things is really understanding the full impact of bullying. And one of the things is the fallout, the effects of the child being bullied. What does that look like too often when a child is being bullied? What do we see? For example, a lot of times it might be that we see the child becomes depressed. Just the impact of what it does to a kid who is being bullied. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Sure. Sure. First, thank you, Ann, for having us on.
Yes.
I think this is a really important topic. Kids today and forever haven't always been the most adept at expressing exactly what they're feeling at times. And so I think, what we ask our staff to do in schools and what we want all of our parents to do at home is just really monitor what children do on a daily basis, whether they're young children or whether they're teenagers. I think parents are probably best equipped to be able to know how their child is acting on a daily basis,
Right.
whether it's changes in sleep patterns, their interest in attending school, I think is important, the peer relationships that they have. Did parents see a sudden decline in peer relationships? It could have impact on eating habits. But anytime a parent feels like they're seeing a change in their child's behavior that seems to have a negative impact, I think, the first step is to obviously have the discussion with the child about what might be going on. But certainly, we're available as well to help. We have an absolutely fantastic administrative and counseling staff in all of our schools. And if parents are struggling because they see their child struggle, I would just encourage parents to reach out to the counseling staff in any of our schools, talk through what they're seeing in their child, and then, our counseling staff can have that two-way conversation and hopefully be able to provide some resources and help. And then certainly if it does appear to be a situation where it was warranted some type of an investigation because it was either bullying or some other peer-to-peer conflict that we wanted to help the family resolve, we're really able to decide what the best action steps are.
And the other side to that as well, though, is what about the child who is the aggressor, who bullies? That's a child also that is in need of help and support. And what does that mean sometimes when we see a child who bullies? What's that an indication of sometimes when we see a child who becomes an aggressor? That child also is exhibiting some issues.
Absolutely, and I don't think I have the exact statistics here, but I
Yeah.
think what the data actually show are that most students who end up being the aggressor in a bullying situation have also been the victim of bullying.
Interesting.
And, so a lot of this is society's learned behaviors
Yes.
over time. And it's also a function, I think, of kids growing up. They're exploring their own peer-to-peer relationships, social boundaries. And, in my experience as a school administrator, I actually haven't run into too many students who found themselves as aggressors in any type of situation, whether it rose to the level of bullying or not,
Right.
who entered into it planning to get to that stage.
Exactly.
And so I think at all times, at least for our schools, and I'm sure parents do this at home too, but you take each student and child for who they are. And so whether they have found themselves in a situation where maybe they are the aggressor in a situation or the victim, you really want to work with that student or child to help
Absolutely.
them
Right.
progress where they need to go.
And that is one of the most important things, is that parents need to understand if they have a child who has engaged in bullying conduct, the school really is very careful not to label
Right, that's
the child
important,
a bully.
isn't it? Right,
Right,
yeah.
because oftentimes that student is a student who might have some social skill issues, who might have some anxiety, social anxiety, and is, going through something perhaps outside of home that is impacting their ability to engage appropriately at school. And so that is one of the reasons why the law doesn't use the word bully for any
Exactly.
person.
Right.
And really the focus is on supporting both the target and the aggressor. And oftentimes in those situations, the target will have a support plan that is put into place after this conduct has happened to support the target. And there's also a support plan put in place for the aggressor.
Absolutely.
To provide the supports for the aggressor in a educational way. And sometimes there does need to be disciplinary consequences, but
Right.
it's not just discipline, it's discipline plus education and support.
Right, because a lot of times if a parent would say, I don't want my child to be labeled bad, and more willing to come out and knowing how that child is going to be treated, and say, what, we're all here working to help all kids, right? So that's a big piece of it. But it does speak to also the child. There's also the child who is neither of those, who witnesses it, and all the emotional implications of helplessness or feeling guilt if they don't intervene. So bullying is such a complex, isn't it? That really, it's not just black and white and all of that. But
Absolutely.
And if you can just, Pete, especially if you can let us know, this has been in effect for a while, the legislation and the bullying plan and intervention and progress, evidence of how are we doing with this big issue? Are we seeing fewer incidents? Are we seeing more people coming forward? Can you give us a little bit of some data points or some things that you could share with us about the progress now that we're making?
Sure. There's really two data points that Franklin Public Schools uses to look at bullying incidents within the school, other than purely the number of incidents we see per year. We will look at the results of our Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, which asks specific questions about bullying and harassment in schools and kind of the school environment in general. But then we will also look at our own internal climate and culture surveys that we do with parents. Some of the data suggests that there's still probably about 25% of our families feel like there's bullying that occurs in and out of our schools, and Metro West survey supports that. I think the challenge that we see in looking at some of our longitudinal data right now is that initially when the bullying law was enacted, we saw an influx of bullying complaints. But what we found also, there was maybe not a full understanding of what is and may not be bullying at the time.
Yes.
And so...
Do you think that's clearer now, that people have a better, from parent phone calls and things, that they're getting what the difference is? You do? Okay.
I do.
Because that was
think,
huge, that part, when you stressed that a lot in your presentation. Yeah.
And I also think there is a willingness to come forward. I think there was a reluctance.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yes.
By not only some students, but some parents who maybe grew up in an era where bullying wasn't handled in such a responsive and structured way, that they would, maybe discourage their students, their children, from going forward and reporting it, and they wouldn't report it. And the law has really brought to light the importance of being able to report and get support from the school in responding to it. So I think that a lot of districts have seen an uptick after the law was passed.
Absolutely.
Possibly due to that, too.
Yeah, I agree, Paige. And I think one of the things that is encouraging, though, on the flip side, the other piece of data that especially I like to look at is, do our students report that they have an adult within our schools that they feel comfortable talking to, and that is overwhelmingly positive response. Our last climate and culture survey we did with parents, which I think was 2014, we had over 90% of our parents reporting that they did have a trusted adult, and maybe 3 to 4% reported that they did not, and then there were some undecideds in that as well, which tends to be the case, and I'm not exactly sure. There wasn't a lot of information to dig into why people weren't sure, but I think that actually has increased over the years. So I think really fostering positive relationships within the schools, peer to peer, and then among students and adults, is just a critical step, because I can't envision any scenario in any culture where every interaction is going to go exactly as planned or hoped, and so having good relationships really helps us get to kids and help them process that.
But you stress particularly the bystander. How important that is. I found that as a middle school principal too, are you finding clearly there must be more people who see it as not as tattling but as courage to come forward? Is that something that you're seeing in the statistics on, that people are coming forward more as bystanders?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other students.
Exactly.
And students taking the initiative to really squelch the behavior before it really rises to the level of bullying. I think I've seen that too in schools, and that's been really nice to see.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because I think, so critical to encouraging bystanders to come forward is how schools react when there might be a bullying situation, because if bystanders see schools' reaction purely as a punitive one, where it's only a disciplinary approach, then I think people are less likely to want to report for fear of a negative consequence for their peers.
That was going to be my next question, because it doesn't always have to be when I think people don't want to get somebody else in trouble. But if they know that there are different ways of dealing with this, because you said it doesn't always, there are various ways of handling these. It's not black and white, that you're automatically kicked out. There's a lot of different ways, right, Pete, of handling these issues that come forward depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Yeah.
I think our first and foremost goal as schools is always to stop the negative behavior or negative interactions that are happening between kids, regardless of whether it's bullying or some other issue that might be causing the interaction not to go as planned. And then really to support both kids through that process. Right. I think after that, the approach that schools have to take really is going to be situational.
Situational, right? People
Absolutely.
have to understand that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and most of the peer-to-peer interactions we deal with in schools are resolved without disciplinary
Right.
consequence.
Right.
When you start to get into some of the most serious,
Right.
especially that have legal consequences as well, which
That's a different-
probably make up 0.5% of all peer-to-peer interactions
Right.
in a school, there certainly needs to be some type of a consequence because the absence of consequence can promote
Exactly. They need
the
to
next
see that as
riskier
well.
behavior.
You're right.
So, it really needs to be proportional to what goes on. But I think in terms of coming back to this notion of encouraging bystanders to speak out, the more we can show our students that we take an educational approach to peer-to-peer interactions and solving their problems, and that we're actually a resource for them, as opposed to just the disciplinarian, I think that it actually encourages
That's
students
huge.
to come forward.
That's
Yeah.
the biggest difference from
Yeah.
the time I was, growing up. That's that's so important. That's
Yep.
changed the whole climate, everything. You had also spoke about the whole cyberbullying. That's big, isn't it? I mean, it's a big problem, isn't it? Because it's so hard to. Can you speak a little bit about how big that problem is? I know we referenced it. But, yeah.
I would say when people call me, so when things are pretty, serious, and that's when I tend to get the phone calls as the attorney for the district, it's generally because there's been a bullying situation that involves some sort of social media. So sometimes and oftentimes it won't even start with the social media. It will start with interactions in school or, at an event, and then it will continue and linger on and then start to seep into social interactions on social media. And what's difficult for students who are the targets of that is that back in the day when I was in elementary school, if you were the subject of bullying during the course of the school week, you could go home and at least be home and be safe in your home for the weekend. And now students who are targets of cyberbullying, it's not only at school, but they go home and they get on their iPads and then it's coming at them again and again and again all weekend long. And so they feel like they have no safe haven from it. So addressing the cyberbullying is very, very important. And again, that is really an opportunity for parents to become involved, in terms of schools talking to parents about, we might need to shut your students, sites down, you might need to take the phone for the weekend. I mean, both, sometimes so the target can have a break from it and an investigation can happen. And also if someone is being an aggressor online, again, for that to stop. So it's something that is very important, and I think really exacerbates the issue of bullying in schools.
I think when we were talking about kind of maybe follow up some of the things that keeping it out in the forefront for parents is some programs that people can view online or on through cable access is on this topic alone, what parents can and should be doing, and there are some things though, like just the way you were talking about your own son, how you monitor. Can you talk a little bit about that, your own kids?
Yeah, I was going to come back to that too, because
Yeah.
I think Paige just
Yeah.
hit on something really important.
Yeah.
I think, kids today are growing up living their life online,
Yeah.
or a large part of their lives are actually lived online, which, we can see negatively, but it also is a huge positive because they're connecting with people who they may never have connected with
Right.
before, but that also
And
needs
it's
some
not
regulation.
It's not
Yeah.
going away. I mean,
No.
it's here to stay.
It really isn't. But I think one of the challenges for parents, and I live this myself
Yes,
as a parent,
that's what I
is
was gonna say, you're a
that's
good
not
resource,
That's not
yes.
how we grew up.
Yeah.
The technology wasn't available to us. We didn't foresee this coming, and so a lot of the lives our kids are leading they're leading their lives in places that we don't expect it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think parents really, especially with younger kids, looking at how can I monitor what my students is doing. I have a son who's in 6th grade, and he has a cell phone, which is invaluable for all his activities
Right,
and making sure we
right.
can connect with him. But on the flip side, when he took that cell phone, we said, this isn't yours. This is ours.
You made it clear
We
right
have
from the
access to
beginning,
it.
right.
Absolutely. We go on each week. We look through his text messages. We have conversations with him about, what those text messages
So
are.
he's used to at a young age knowing this is the rules of the house, right? Right from as soon as they get that first,
Yeah, it's, social interaction was never considered private, really, until the age of technology. We understood that we were interacting with people face to face, and I think now with technology, sometimes we feel like we're interacting with a computer screen, and there just happens to be someone on the other end of that. And I think the more we can help kids understand that even online interactions are still human interactions, and they have to apply the same skills that they would use in person to their online world is
Right.
important.
And that they're not private, because a lot of times, you know, someone will engage in bullying conduct, you see unintentionally sometimes, because they'll maybe send their friend an unkind picture or statement about another student, and that person takes it and passes it on to other students, and then that causes, you know, bullying to have occurred. So it's not even always understanding on the part of the student that what I send to my best friend may go to 100 people as opposed to just stay with that friend.
Right.
If there's this issue.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the other thing,
Yeah.
too, is the compulsive quality of social media, that kids can't sometimes turn it off. So the idea of they're staying up late at night, they're bringing the phones into the bedroom, and they can't resist the ping of the text in the middle of the night, and then some things can be said. So there is an element to handing it. Some parents don't allow
Yep.
the cell phone, right? I mean,
Right,
that's
take the
another-
phone at night, charge it in the kitchen,
Yeah,
charge it in
just
the
say,
living
no,
room.
this is mine at
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
Just to take away that, because it's so hard to resist. So
Right.
right, it's
Yeah.
and the other piece to this. Were you going to say something else?
Just that also, there's also kind of an acknowledgement that students can be bystanders not only at school but also online.
right. Oh, good point.
So watch, you know, if students are seeing one student being treated unkindly online, there can be a really big difference between, I've seen it where, 100 students don't like, if it's you can like or not like something, don't like if someone is being treated poorly by another person online. Or if someone is being a champion for someone, then they can like it. So you can, there is also an opportunity for students to be good bystanders and good citizens online as well.
That's true. But then if they are aware of, let's say, someone who is being targeted, that's another example of them coming forward to a trusted adult. And then if it is a parent, for the parent to make the phone call to school and say, listen, my child came and said, this child is, being harassed or seeing a lot of pile on here, and it's
Yep.
really, that they can make us aware of that as well, just so.
And you had asked for some suggestions for parents. And
Yes.
one thing I was thinking as you were talking about that, and with liking and not liking, what we're finding is an increase in students having multiple social media accounts on the same platform.
Right.
So students have 2 Twitter accounts.
Yes.
They have a public Twitter account where they say, absolutely, parents, come on and enjoy it and look at all the positive change I'm making in the world. All the students I support, things like that, all the great things happening. And then, they also have a protected Twitter account that has,
Ooh, they're
a
smart,
username their
yeah.
parents may not recognize.
It's a big thing on Instagram.
Yeah.
I have a 16-year-old daughter, and the teenagers all do. They have their public one, and then they do have one, and there's a name for it. I can't recall what the name is, but it's the one that they use just for their friends.
Right. Kids
that
have
may
figured
be
this
quite
out.
different.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez, got to work on that one. All right, but then the whole idea of prevention is huge, is in part of this overall plan. And can you speak a little bit about some of the professional development, some of the programs that are going on, particularly in Franklin, relative to sort of the prevention and how we're dealing with social emotional health in our kids, and a lot of the resiliency things that are help us with this issue. Can you speak a little bit about that? Some of the
Sure,
professional
absolutely.
development?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because we take this very seriously in Franklin, and our schools have really, over the last half of a decade, been very dedicated to helping students develop good social emotional skills, as well as honing our own skill as administrators and counselors at dealing with the situations that do inevitably arise still. So we really take 2 approaches with professional development for our staff. The first is, what can we do with all of our staff to help them learn how to teach good social emotional skills to all of our students in classrooms? And, we have a couple initiatives currently underway. And if people want to hear more and read more about what we're doing as a district, they can go online to our website and look at our district improvement plan. But we really have 2 major goals as a district that speak right to the preventative work we're trying to do. One is a goal in social emotional learning. The other is really a goal in school climate and culture. So under social emotional learning, we have been the better part of 3 to 4 years now working to train all of our staff in responsive classroom techniques, which is really a way of being. And a way of operating classrooms. It started at the elementary level, and it's really about how do we teach kids to interact with each other in positive ways, build social emotional learning skills within our students, build resiliency within kids, and create classrooms that go beyond being just a place of learning into being communities where kids get excited to come into and develop positive social interaction with each other. So that's been one piece. We're also introducing something called zones of regulation in our classrooms at the elementary level, which will also make its way through the district. And zones of regulation is really a skill-based program where students learn how to recognize and monitor their own emotions.
That's so important.
Absolutely. And so whether students are feeling happy or they are feeling kind of red and angry or whether they're feeling blue and a bit down, they have some skills to be able to label and vocalize their own emotions, which, what we know is sometimes, the negative behaviors come from students' ability not to regulate their own emotions.
Right. They don't understand
and that starts with
them.
recognition.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So, those are the proactive things we are trying to do. Zones of regulation is new to us this year, and there's more to come on that, certainly, at our elementary schools. Responsive classroom has been really successful in Franklin. I've visited probably 80 classrooms just since taking this position this year, and it's just so evident, the cultures that are being created within the classrooms in our elementary schools. And what we're really excited about is we're one of the first districts kind of nationally to look at implementing responsive classroom in the middle area as well. So we have just finished our first sessions of training for our 6th grade teachers, and over the
That
next
was
2
Friday,
years.
wasn't it? Because I
Absolutely.
talked to one of the teachers right
Yep.
afterward, and I just happened to bump into him downtown, and he was saying how excited he was about the training, and
Yeah.
he was so excited about it.
It's just a great toolkit
Yeah.
for teachers to be able to work with our kids. And what's nice is now our middle school teachers are learning the vocabulary and strategies that are in place in our elementary schools. So it's really a continuum.
Consistency. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our adjustment counselors actually worked last year, and they teamed up with the YMCA here in Franklin, and they brought the same training that we use with our teachers now to the YMCA for summer programs, because what we know is it's shared students.
Right.
And these are our
Absolutely.
kids in Franklin.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
yeah, those are some of the proactive things. And on the kind of responsive end, we have done a good amount of training over the years. And what we have tried to really focus in on is developing our skill as administrators and counseling staff in really helping some of our specialized populations of students.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure we're identifying issues that can arise in special populations, but then also support those. So a couple of years ago, we had a number of teams from Franklin go out to various trainings on sexual harassment. And then this year we actually just had the Department of Education Safe and Supportive Schools initiative come in and do some training with our administration on really supporting our LGBTQ population of students. And that was a fantastic training. Our administrators very responsive to that and have asked for more training in that area. But I think that's something that, as we can continue to make sure we're supporting all of our kids in schools and learning how to most appropriately support kids with different needs,
Exactly.
that's going to help us.
That's so important. I was thinking back because I had mentioned this. This was many years ago. My nephew, who's gay, was at a high school on the South Shore, targeted unmercifully. It was the most painful thing to see that he had to resort to suicidal ideation because he was so. No one knew how to deal with it. The teachers didn't know how to deal with it. The administration didn't know how to deal with it. It was just one of those most painful things to think what this young man was going through, and the fact that this is being addressed is so important. That's just really that's
Right. I think the key is that what districts like Franklin are doing is using research-based tools not only to address sort of the proactive elements but also the responsive measures. So it's not relying upon sort of the informal response of one administrator or a teacher, but that everyone is following the same plan.
exactly.
And so
exactly.
Students can expect the same level of support and same response from classroom to classroom, from building to building.
So just doesn't rely on one teacher. You're right.
Right.
Yeah, that's the way, But shifting, I just had a
Yeah.
few more questions relative to focusing in, homing in a little bit more on the parent. perspective, because when we know our kids are in pain and we discover that our child might be a target or whatever, there's a huge emotional, visceral reaction. So obviously, it seems like the first thing to do is to determine if it is bullying or regular peer conflict. If a parent doesn't know, they can call, right, and find out before they assume it is or ask questions. Is that something that you would encourage them to do if they're not sure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first and foremost, it's about a mindset about how we're going to approach problems when they arise. And at the end of the day, the most, you called it visceral, and, everyone who's a parent can speak to
Absolutely.
this. When you see your own child and they're not in the place that you want them to be, and they're struggling, we get very emotional and we want to react quickly, and we want to put an end to whatever was causing that. I think starting with the mindset that everyone who we encounter is part of a piece of solving that problem is a really important step. And what I would encourage parents to do is reach out early and make us aware. I think sometimes, too, what I see parents do is they don't want to jump up their own ladder of inference, so they hold on to the information until they see 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 instances of something happen, and then what happens is the parent's own emotions about the situation rise. The child is very emotional at that point because they're struggling and they're not seeing resolution. And so a lot of the work we do is to help manage those emotions on everyone's part and bring people back to a state where we can actually focus on solving that problem. So I would say, a recognition that schools really are here to partner with families to help solve these problems, but then 2, reaching out early rather than waiting until it's too late, and we've seen more of a negative impact.
So
on
err
kids.
on the side of caution rather than waiting too long, or
Right, and also not to get too hung up on whether the conduct really meets the state definition of bullying under the bullying law, because regardless of whether it's bullying or it's just unkind conduct, the school is prepared to address it.
Good point.
And that's the key.
Got it.
And sometimes I do see the parents are so caught up, there'll be an investigation, and maybe it was one unkind incident, and it certainly is an important one and one the school will respond to, but it doesn't meet this definition.
Right.
And parents are upset that there wasn't a finding of bullying. But, there is the finding, and really what is important is the response, making your
Exactly.
child feel better at school, and how do we do that? And there are such an array of tools available to schools now to address how the student feels at schools that parents really need to focus on that and helping their child feel better at school.
No, I think that's a really critical point, because what I see is, as conflicts progress, you have conflicts that started with students and then progress to families.
Yes.
And
yeah, I see that.
I think what happens is as people sit on these issues that might be brewing under the surface, one side is becoming frustrated with it. But if it's not addressed and both families aren't engaged in solving that problem, then what ends up happening is the situation's progressed where the stakes are so high that now people's defense mechanisms turn on, because it's really an avoidance of consequence at some level. And so my belief is if we can address these issues early in the process, we can do it really in a non-confrontational way and get everyone supporting children.
That's but just I know we've addressed this, but I'm the parent. My child, I believe, is not safe. So while an investigation is going on, I'm sending my child to school. How do I keep in that time when I make that phone call as a parent and my child is being targeted, I'm worried about his or her safety. How do you right away keep that child safe while the investigation is going on? That would be.
I think I think when parents call, they should call and they should report it to the principal or the assistant principal. It should be a building administrator that they're reporting to. And then the call should be, my child came home and told me the following information. I'm very concerned that my child might be being bullied or something, might be happening at school. And so I'm calling to report it to you. And then the second discussion should be, how can we work together to make sure that my child is feeling safe during this process?
Right. Okay.
And really there should be a discussion about it. And I think it's important that the discussion involve the parents and the school administrator to make sure that what the school administrator is offering to put in place to support the student during that process is something that the student will accept and will actually, be effective for that student. So there needs to be collaboration at that point.
Oh,
but there should
good.
be some interim measures that are put in place
Good.
during the
and that,
investigation.
again, that's part of the support plan and all that. But
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, acting again as a parent is emotional. If it's your child, and say, I've just got to keep my child safe. But finally, I just had a few, these are some of the misconceptions about bullying, and because sometimes as parents we can overreact, but then sometimes we can minimize. For example, boys will be boys. We got to get rid of that, right? I mean, that's not true, is it? And girls don't bully. That's not true, is it? No. It's just a natural part of childhood. No. It's going to make our kids tougher if they deal with this. These are things that sometimes parents say to kids, that's not good either, is it? And then the idea that telling the teacher is tattling. We got to get rid of that one too,
Yep.
don't we? Some of those misconceptions, but that's right. So I think we've covered kind of it. But I think from our discussion today, which has been so helpful, is there anything I left out that we wanted to address?
I think one of the other things that parents sometimes ask and want to know and focus on is what is going to happen to the other child.
Yes.
I expect and want this other child to, be banished from the school forever and for us never to see this child again. And I
Right,
want to
good
know
point.
all of the punishment or discipline that will happen to that child. And the school district, because of student privacy laws, is not allowed to share
Oh, good point.
the consequences, what discipline may or may not be imposed upon the aggressor. So what the school can tell you is what they've done. They certainly should tell you about their investigation, how they investigated, and what the results of the investigation are, and what they're going to do to make your child feel safe and supported at school. They cannot really tell you what happened to the other child, what the discipline was. They can tell you that they follow the student handbook, code of conduct, but it is often the case that you would not know what happens to the other child, whether they were
That's a good
suspended,
point,
whether and again, a lot of the focus is not there. There will be disciplinary consequences in appropriate circumstances, but a lot of the focus is on education and making sure that we're going to prevent this from happening again. So there will be a lot of work behind the scenes, but the family may not be privy to what that work is.
That's a very good point,
Yeah.
right?
And that can be probably one of the hardest conversations as
Yes,
part of
absolutely.
an investigation with families, because no matter what the outcome is, that piece of it sometimes will leave a void with people,
Right.
Especially parents of victims and victims. But I think the laws are there because kids are kids at the end of the day. And,
That's right.
We want to focus on moving all kids forward, supporting all kids, whether they were the victim of something or whether they may be an aggressor, because an aggressor could very well have been a victim.
Exactly.
So,
yeah, good point.
it leaves a void. But I think if people can remember that this is still about kids and we're dealing with children.
That's great. Did we say it all? Cover it all? Good? Yeah?
Yeah,
This was great.
I think so.
No, I
Sure.
really
Thank you.
appreciate both of you again taking your time, and it does speak to how we come together as a community, doesn't it, when it's parents and schools and police all working together to support our kids. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
and
so much.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today on It Takes a Village, Raising Resilient Kids in Today's World. I'm Ann Bergen. Thank you.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.